Hey, and welcome back to another episode about responsiveness. So far, we've talked about how to make containers align to your design and how to make them responsive. But no matter how good you understand the container, some items cannot be responsive. And I want to talk about that in this episode because there are some tricks I think you should know. Sometimes Elementor makes it really easy for you because some features are built into the widget. The menu widget automatically changed, as you probably know, to a hamburger icon on mobile. So here Elementor already knows, like, okay, there's not enough space for all of these items. Let's just change it to something else. For example, this, a hamburger icon. This is what you call it a hamburger because it looks a little bit like a hamburger. Or, for example, the new tabs widget also knows that on mobile you need a different layout because this would probably not fit. So then Elementor helps you by automatically converting it into a vertical layout like this. Then you still have some settings, but the main point is that with many widgets, Elementor helps you to make it responsive, but not always. And this is not always Elementor's fault. Sometimes this is just a design thing. So let's go to my Figma and let's take a look at the desktop version we see over here and then the mobile version we see over here. You see that this is a bit different. The first thing you see is that here we have two extra visuals, this one, and on mobile that would be a little bit too much. So that's why I've hidden this item on mobile, and sometimes that's all you need to do. But let's say that you want to have both of the brand colors, the purple and the green, also on mobile. So let's say that you just want this circle to be on your mobile as well. For example, like that. So now we need to work with some settings that allow us to have different images on desktop than we have on mobile. We also see an example over here. Here we have a pricing button, but there's not enough space on mobile. So I just have the hamburger icon over here and I just hit the pricing button. That's on this website. That's not a big problem because we also have a pricing button over here. So people can still go to that page. Also, the order is different. Here you can see that this container is first and then the scooter, but on mobile it's different, so we need to switch it. The buttons as well, these ones are small, and on mobile I've made them more easy to click by making them 100% of the width. So as you can see, this first part is already quite challenging. So let's go to Elementor and let me show you how this works. Let's first start with hiding. So this button should not be visible on mobile. So I'm going to open my header template. So this menu needs to stay, it needs to transform into a hamburger, and this one needs to disappear. So there's an option. If you click on the widget, advanced, you scroll down, responsive, and here you can hide it from different breakpoints. By default, you only have a desktop, a tablet, and mobile, but I have one extra breakpoint, which I will also cover in an upcoming episode. You can have 6 in total here. But all you need to know for now is that you can hide them on certain breakpoints. Okay, so let's go to mobile, for example. Here you can see that I checked the hide and then it hides it. Inside of here you don't see it, but if you want to see how it looks, you close this window and then you see how it looks, because then it hides the elements that you put on hide. You can also press Command P or Control P on Windows, I think so, in order to hide that, so you can see if it's actually hidden. So that's a simple trick you can do if some elements are just too much on mobile. So that's the first thing, just hide elements, and then when you want to see the preview, close this window and then you can see how it looks. But you can also do the other way around, because you can see that I still have this purple circle over here. So what I actually did, let me go back to the desktop, is that I also added a circle because I needed a circle. So I just exported one circle as an image or as an SVG, and then what's it called? Oh, it should be called purple circle. I just uploaded one image of a purple circle, and I've also placed it inside of this container with custom positioning, which will be covered in a future episode. And then what I did is I just did the opposite. I just hide it on desktop, laptop, and tablet, and only on mobile I show it. So then I can play around with it. You see? So now I could just pick my purple circle and place it wherever I want. Maybe make it a bit bigger. And also for my image over here, I can replace it until I have what I want on mobile. Then check it with Command P. And now it's pretty close to my design, as you can see. Perfect. And does this improve the speed of your website? Well, no, because you're adding images on desktop that are loaded in but then are hidden. But sometimes you need to sacrifice a little bit of speed for a nice design by adding an extra image. And this image itself is only 40 KB, so it's super small. But this, of course, depends on the image. Okay, let's now talk about the order. How did I do that? So the first option to change the order is to just go to your container that you want to be first on mobile. You go to your mobile mode, and then you go to the advanced tab, and then you say order, and then you put it on start. And there it is. Now it overrides what you've set up on desktop, so it still keeps it the way you want on desktop, because it only applies it on mobile. But then when you go to mobile, it says this container should be at the start. You could also do it in a little bit different way by using numbers. So you could also go over here and then custom order and says that this container, which with the scooter, needs to be number 1. That doesn't work. Even 0 doesn't work because you have to give both of them numbers. So then you could say, I want this to be number 1 and I want this one to be number, I clicked on the size. This one to be number 2. Then it also works. Of course, this is one more step, which is not necessary when you have a design with just 2 sides. For example, over here as well. Here we have a situation where we have a zigzag on the desktop, but on a mobile that would look a little bit unprofessional. So if you go to mobile, you first want to have a text and then an image and then text and then image. Because if you don't change the order, then you have 2 images and 2 texts next to each other. So I don't know what I've done here, to be honest. It can be multiple ways. Let me check. Oh yeah, here I've used custom order 3. Why 3? Well, that has another reason. And that is because this whole box is one container. So let's see what I've done over here. Because all of these containers are in one big container, I have given all of the containers an order only on mobile. So this one is on number 1. This one is number 2. Wait, why is it also number 1? That's not good. This one is number 2. So this one should be 0, just in case. This container should be number 3. This image should be 4. You see, you can also do it with widgets. This one should be number 5, and this one should be 6. Oh, this one should be 6. I don't know why I made a mistake there. It still worked for some reason. And of course, you also can do the same on a tablet. But if I would have a container around this, which is not the best way because you can use less containers, but if I would have a container around here, then I would just pick this one up, go to mobile, and then say on mobile, I want this container to be at the end or this one to be at the front. That is also an option, so I hope that that makes sense. Another place where I have found myself do that is with menus. So let me find a menu. Yeah, so when you have a menu like this, you don't change the order, right? Because you also want the logo to be left on mobile and the menu on the right. But when you have a situation like this with 3 items, then you may want to change the order on mobile. So in this situation, you can simply just click on this one, go to advanced, order, and put them at the end. And then we still have some alignment issues. And now I need to mess around with all of the width settings in order to get the design that I want. I needed to put this hamburger icon on the minimum size, which is inline auto. These social media icons are now on grow. That's not really the point of this tutorial, but I just wanted to show you real quick how you can change that. But you could also just put this one at order 1, and then this one at 2, and this one at 3. That also works. But in this situation, it was just easier to click on this one and then put it at the end. And then make sure to also do that for your other devices. Okay, and then another thing I want to show is that you can make buttons full width by using this option. I don't always do this, but sometimes it is nice. And then the last thing that I want to show is that you can have a different background image on mobile if you want to. This is not an option for normal images. So let's go to just a normal image like the scooter over here. We don't see any responsive settings over here. We just see dynamic tags and image and then the delete option. But there is an option in Elementor where you can have a different image on each device, but it's not possible in the image widget, but it is possible in the background image. So if you click on your container and let's say that you think that this image doesn't look good and you've tried all the settings here to change the positioning, but it just doesn't work. You can change the image on mobile or on any device. So, for example, let's say that we have this image on mobile. All right, so now we have this image on mobile, and then when we go to desktop, we have this image. So sometimes that is useful. I have found myself doing this with shadows because the background overlay feature here has a shadow feature where you can add a shadow, but not all of the settings here are responsive. As you can see, for example, location of the shadow, which is important. It doesn't have responsive settings, so sometimes I find myself having to put the shadows in the image already instead of using the overlay, and then having different images per device in order to get the shadows right. And that is just because Elementor didn't add responsive settings over here still after all these years, which is frustrating. So then you have to add a different image for every breakpoint if you want to make it look good. Now I've given you a more unrealistic example by choosing a completely different image, but sometimes that is what you want. So that's why I'm showing you that when you delete it, it goes back to the one you've set up on desktop. So those are a few options you can do if whatever you try with the container is just not giving you the responsive design that you want. This episode took a little bit longer than I expected, but I hope that you learned something. Let's go to the next episode because we're going to talk about custom positioning. Welcome back to a new chapter about design. Not about designing websites, but how to transform your design from a tool like Figma to Elementor. We're going to talk about layout, custom positioning, and the new container. After you have followed all of the episodes from this chapter, you will have an understanding how the more complex layouts are built. The first big concept that you need to understand is that every website is just a combination of building blocks and elements inside of it. In Elementor, the elements we call widgets. For example, an image widget or a text widget. And the building blocks we call containers. Previously, Elementor was calling these boxes sections or columns. Since Elementor started, they used sections and columns, which were not super easy to understand. That's why this video on my YouTube channel about sections and columns almost got 500,000 views, which proves to me that things like layout are not that easy. And personally, I agree because I spent so much time in the container to understand it. And I've tried to make it super simple for you. So we're going to mainly focus on the container, but I will reference the sections and columns because I know many of you guys already have been working with Elementor for a few years with sections and columns. So I will make some comparisons so that you can train your mind on how to think from the container instead of the old system with sections and columns. Also, do not be scared to use the new container since it is stable enough now to use. Elementor has been testing the container for 1.5 years, and right now, as I'm recording this video, it says that the status is release candidate, which is developer language for it is stable enough now. We're just making a few small tweaks before we push it out to the main public, and there's a high chance that when you're watching this episode, that is already fully pushed out to all of the websites. And again, I've tested it. It's stable enough. You can use it, especially when you watch all of these episodes. But make sure you watch all of the episodes in this chapter so you have a full understanding of it. And older websites that are built in the old system with sections and columns will probably stay like that. I don't think that they will push an update to change all the old websites, but if they do, well, then you know how to fix the issues because you have watched these episodes. But for new websites, they will push you to use the container, so you will have to learn it anyways if you want to keep building websites with Elementor. I mean, you're in this course now, so that should be the goal. Okay, so like I said, you should think of websites as a bunch of boxes, which we're now going to call containers, where there are widgets or elements inside of it. Sometimes, disclaimer, I still use the word section in this course. Why do I do that? Well, that is not a reference to the old sections with Elementor, but section is just a word we use in design to describe a part of the website. So for example, this is a section of the website. I mean, section is just an English word that Elementor has used, right? So sometimes when I say section, do not get confused. It probably means just a part of the website. And when I use it to describe the old system, I will try to say old system sections from the old system so that it's clear when I use what kind of words. So before we get started, I want to tackle two things. The first one is that it's not always obvious where there is a container. For example, in my my design, you can see this part over here where you obviously need to use a container, but you can also see this part where you would think like there's a container on the left and there's a container on the right. But then in the final website, you will see that I've only used a container on the left and not on the right. That is because widgets, like the image widget, also have a little box around them which you can use. So widgets also have a kind of container around them. And by knowing how to do this, you can limit the amount of containers you use, keeping your website fast. You can achieve many designs in multiple ways with the container. Let me be clear about that. There's not one way, but in many cases, there are just a few or maybe one way to use it in the most efficient way so that your website will stay fast, which is what I'm going to try to teach you. So don't be too hard on yourself in the beginning. You can use some extra containers, but if you know how to limit them, then do that. The second point that I want to make is that you don't always need to use a container. Sometimes you can solve some things with widgets. For example, look at this design where you have a card or a container with an icon and two text and a background. You could do this with a container, but you could also use a widget, for example, and then give the widget a background. Let me show you what I mean. Over here, you can see that the icon box widget, so let me drag a new one in, already has an icon and two texts. So sometimes you can just give widgets a background like this, and then you also have a container looking thing. So again, you don't always need to use a container for things that look a container in your design. Oh, and there's one more thing I forgot to say in this episode, and that is that Elementor has two versions of the container, the Flexbox and the Grid. But the Grid is still under development, it's in beta, it's too unstable for now, and I haven't spent enough time in it yet to explain it well. So this first version of the course is just gonna focus on the Flexbox, and once the Grid is stable enough and I understand it well, then I will update the videos or just add a few videos about the CSS Grid as well. The Grid should make it easier to create grids because that's a little bit challenging with Flexbox, but we need to be a bit patient for this to be stable enough. All right, let's continue. And the last point I want to make here is that things that don't look to be part of any kind of container are probably part of a container. They have to be, but they are just custom positioned. So for example, you can see the scooter right here, but these parts are outside of the grid. You can also see that in the final website. Here's my container, but as you can see, this image is like half not in it. Technically, this image is in this container, right? But it just has custom positioning, which I will also explain in this chapter, to make it look like it's not part of the container. And with these kind of tricks, you can make your designs look much more interesting. Here's another example where there are a lot of custom positioning going on. You have this button over here. It's actually just part of this container, but if you use some custom positioning, you can place it outside and it looks a lot more interesting. So just know that for any design, if something doesn't look it's part of any container, then you know that it probably is, because widgets always have to be inside of container, at least one background container, but they have just played around with the settings to make it look like it's like floating in space, okay? So I hope that this gave you some confidence that you can tackle this chapter as well, because this is basically what transforming your design from your design field to Elementor looks like, playing around with containers and custom positioning to make the design of your dreams. Okay, let's now get started with the first feature in the container, a very important one called direction. Welcome back to the episode about justify content and space between, the brother of align items. Inside of the container you can find it above the align items, and it's very similar but less powerful than aligning items, because it will not adjust the height or the weight of the elements inside of it. And it is very similar because it can also align items on the page, like you can see over here, but it does not have the power to change the height or the width of the items inside of the container. When the direction is on horizontal, the justify content is also on horizontal, because right now I'm aligning the items on the horizontal axis. If you put it on vertical, then they will flip, in the same way as align items flip when you change the direction. So when align items is on vertical mode, then justify content is on horizontal, and vice versa. These controls are working right now, as you can see, but sometimes they don't seem to work. And this is because there's simply no space for them to move. So for example, in this situation, if all of these containers would be 35% wide, which I will adjust right now. So now these three containers take up 100% of the width. So now, since the containers are too big, it's simply not possible anymore to use the justify content because there is no space left and right for them to move. For the same reason as that is sometimes the case for align items, because then there's no space on the top and on the bottom. So just know that when the controls don't work, then there is simply no space for them to move. So I will put them back at 25 so we have some room to play with. Alright, so we have 6 options. We have left, middle and right, and then we have 3 more options: space between, space around and space evenly. I rarely use space around and space evenly. Actually, I've never used them on an actual project because I have other ways to create space between the objects with element gap. I think that is a lot better to do, and also with grow, which we will cover in the upcoming episodes. So I don't see a need to use space around and space evenly, but space between can be useful sometimes. I've already showed you this example where I've used space between to create some space between this image widget and this container, because this container plus this image widget is not the full width of this container yet, therefore there is some space to play with. As you can see, this container is 40%, this image is 48%, so we still have some space in the middle. And as you can see, I've also done that on the final scooter website, where I've actually used space between on this whole section or this whole big container, which automatically then pushes everything to the sides. And this one doesn't move because this one is in a separate container. Another place where space between can be useful is, for example, with a simple menu. Here we just have a simple background container, which is on horizontal mode because we want a logo next to the menu. And then if you put it on space between, then it will automatically push this widget to the side, which is exactly what you want for desktop and mobile as well. You can also use it if you have 3 items like this, because then if you use space between, it will keep the same space between these items as these items. Sometimes you want this because you want to align something in the middle, but keep in mind it's not exactly the middle because this logo is bigger than these icons, therefore this menu is not exactly in the middle. You could solve this by making the logo the same width as the social media icons on the right by changing the widget width in the Advanced tab. Or here we have another situation where we have a container with 2 text layers and then another container with a link and a button. And then we could use space between on this container in order to push this container to the bottom because this container is in vertical mode, therefore creating as much space as possible between these 2 boxes. This is not the most optimal way to do it, so I will show you a better way in an upcoming episode, but now you understand what space between does. For now, let's move on to the next episode, so I will see you there.